Discourse on Method, etc., by Rene Descartes, Part 6. Final part. But it is now 3 years since I arrived at the end of the treatise that contains all these things, and began to review it in order to put it into the hands of a printer, when I learned that some people to whom I defer, and whose authority over my actions can hardly be less than that of my reason over my thoughts, had disapproved of an opinion in physics, published a short time earlier by someone else, concerning which I do not want to say that I was in agreement, but rather I had not noticed anything in it before their censuring of it that I could imagine to be prejudicial either to religion or to the state, nor, as a consequence, had I found anything that would have prevented me from writing it, had reason persuaded me of it. But this made me fear that there might likewise be found among my opinions one in which I had been mistaken, notwithstanding the great care I had always taken never to accept into my beliefs any new opinions for which I did not have very certain demonstrations, and never to write anything that could turn to anyone's disadvantage. This was sufficient to make me change the resolution I had to publish my opinions, for although the reasons for which I had earlier made the resolution were very strong, my inclination, which has always made me hate the business of writing books, immediately made me find enough other reasons to excuse me from it. And these reasons, both for and against, are such that not only do I have some interest in stating them here, but perhaps also the public has some interest in knowing them. I had never made much of the things that came from my mind, and so long as I had reaped no further fruits from the method I am using, except my own satisfaction regarding certain problems that pertain to the speculative sciences, or else my attempt at governing my moral conduct by means of the reason which the method has taught me, I believed I was under no obligation whatever to write anything about it. For as to moral conduct, everyone is so very full of his own viewpoint that it would be possible to find as many reformers as heads, if anyone other than those God has established as rulers over his people, or even those to whom he has given sufficient grace and zeal to be prophets were permitted to try to change anything here. And although my speculations pleased me very much, I believe that others also had their own, which perhaps pleased them more. But as soon as I had acquired some general notions regarding physics, and beginning to test them in various particular difficulties, I had noticed where they could lead, and how much they differed from the principles that had been in use up to the present. I believed I could not keep them hidden away without sinning grievously against the law that obliges us to procure, as much as in our power, the common good of all men. For these notions made me see that it is possible to arrive at knowledge that would be very useful in life, and that, in place of that speculative philosophy taught in the schools, it is possible to find a practical philosophy, by means of which, knowing the force and the actions of fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies that surround us, just as distinctly as we know the various skills of our craftsmen, we might be able, in the same way, to use them for all the purposes which they are appropriate, and thus render ourselves, as it were, masters and possessors of nature. This is desirable not only for the invention of an infinity of devices that would enable one to enjoy trouble-free the fruits of the earth and all the goods found there, but also principally for the maintenance of health, which unquestionably is the first good and the foundation of all the other goods of this life. For even the mind depends so greatly on the temperament and on the disposition of the organs of the body that, if it is possible to find some means to render men generally more wise and more adroit than they have been up until now, I believe that one should look for it in medicine. It is true that the medicine currently practiced contains few things whose usefulness is noteworthy, but without intending to ridicule it, I am sure there is no one, not even among those who make a profession out of it, who would not admit that everything known in medicine is practically nothing in comparison with what remains to be known, and that one could rid oneself of an infinity of maladies, as much of the body as of the mind, and even perhaps also the frailty of old age, if one had a sufficient knowledge of their causes and of all the remedies that nature has provided us. 4. Having the intention of spending my entire life in the search for so indispensable a science, and having found a path that seems to me such that, by following it, one ought infallibly to find this science, unless one is prevented from doing so either by the brevity of life or by a lack of experiments, I judged there to be no better remedy against these two obstacles than to communicate faithfully to the public the entirety of what little I had found, and to urge good minds to try to advance beyond this by contributing, each according to his inclination and ability, to the experiments that must be performed, and also by communicating to the public everything they might learn, in order that, with subsequent inquirers, beginning where their predecessors had left off, and thus joining together the lives and labors of many, we might all advance together much further than a single individual could do on his own. Moreover, I noticed, in regards to experiments, that they are the more necessary as one is more advanced in knowledge. For in the beginning it is better to make use only of those observations which present themselves of their own accord to our senses, and which we could not ignore, provided we reflect, however so little, on them, rather than to search for unusual and contrived experiments. The reason for this is that these more unusual experiments often deceive one when one does not know yet the causes of the more common ones, and that the circumstances on which the unusual ones depend are almost always so special and so minute that it is very difficult to notice them. But the order I have held to has been the following. First, I have tried to find in general the principles or first causes of all that is or can be in the world, without considering anything but God alone who created the world, and without deriving these principles from any other source, but from certain seeds of truth that are naturally in our souls. After that, I examined what were the first and most ordinary effects that could be deduced from these causes. And it seems to me by this means I had found the heavens, stars, and earth, and even, on the earth, water, air, fire, minerals, and other such things that are the most common of all and the simplest, and, as a consequence, easiest to know. Then, when I wanted to descend to those things which were more particular, so many different ones were presented to me that I did not believe it possible for the human mind to distinguish the forms or species of bodies that are on the earth from an infinity of others that could have been there had it been the will of God to have put them there, nor, as a consequence, to make them serviceable to us, unless we advance to the causes through the effects, and make use of many particular observations. After this, passing my mind again over all the objects that have ever presented themselves to my senses, I dare say I did not notice anything in them that I could not easily explain enough by means of the principles I had found. But I must also admit that the power of nature is so ample and so vast, and these principles are so simple and so general, that I noticed hardly any particular effect without at once knowing that it can be deduced in many different ways from them, and that ordinarily my greatest difficulty is to find in which of these ways it depends on them. For, to this end, I know of no other expedient at all except to search once more for some experiments which are such that their outcomes are not the same, if it is in one of these ways rather than in another that one ought to explain the outcome. As to the rest, I am now at the point where, it seems to me, I see quite well what approach one must take in order to make the most of the experiments that can serve this purpose, but I also see that they are of such a kind and of so great a number that neither my adroitness nor my financial resources, even if I had 1,000 times more than I have, would suffice for all of them. So that, according as I henceforth have the opportunity to perform more or less fewer experiments, I shall also advance more or less in the knowledge of nature. This is what I meant to make known through the treatise I had written, and to show there so clearly the utility that the public could gain from such knowledge, that I would oblige all those who desire the general well-being of men, that is to say, all those who are really virtuous, and not those who just appear to be so through false pretenses or just reputation, both to communicate those experiments they have already performed, and to assist me and others in the search for those that remain to be performed. But since then, other reasons have made me change my mind, and to think that I really ought to continue to write about all the things I judge to be of some importance, to the extent that I discover the truth with respect to them, and to take the same care regarding to them as I would take if I wanted to have them published. I did this as much to have all the more of an occasion to examine them well, since without doubt one always looks more carefully at what one believes must be seen by many than what does only for oneself. And often the things that have seemed to me to be true when I began to conceive of them have appeared to me false when I wanted to put them on paper. As in order not to lose any occasion to benefit the public, if I am able, and in order that, if my writings are worth anything, those who will have them after my death can thus use them as will be most fitting. But I must not in any way consent to their being published during my lifetime, so that neither the hostilities and the controversies to which they might be subject, nor even such reputation as they could gain for me, would give me any occasion for losing the time I have intended to use in instructing myself. For although it may be true that each man is obliged to secure the best he can for the good of others, and that to be useful to no one is, strictly speaking, to be worthless, still it is also true that our concerns ought to extend further than to the present time, and that it is well to omit things that perhaps would yield some profit to those who are alive, when it is with the intention of doing other things that would yield even more profit to our posterity. In any event, I very much want people to understand that what little I have learned up until now is almost nothing to what I do not know, and to what I do not despair of being able to learn, for it is almost the same with those who little by little discover the truth in the sciences as it is with those who, upon beginning to acquire wealth, have less trouble in making large acquisitions than they had before, when they were poorer in making very small ones. Or indeed, one can compare them to army commanders whose forces typically grow in proportion to their victories, and who need more skill to maintain themselves after losing a battle than they do to take cities or provinces when they have won one. For it is truly to engage in battle when one tries to overcome all the difficulties and errors that prevent us from arriving at the knowledge of the truth, and it is truly to lose a battle when one accepts a false opinion touching on a matter that is at all general and important. And afterwards it requires much more skill to recover one's former position than to make great progress when one already has principles that are assured. For myself, if I have already found some truth in the sciences, and I hope the things contained in this volume will make people judge that I have found some of them, I can say that these are only things that result from and depend on 5 or 6 principal difficulties that I have surmounted, and that I can count as so many battles in which I have had the fortune on my side. I will not even fear to say that I think I need to win only 2 or 3 more battles like them in order to succeed entirely in my plans, and that my age is not at all so advanced that, in the ordinary course of nature, I might not still have time to bring this about. But I believe I am all the more obliged to manage well the time remaining to me, the more hope I have of being able to use it well, and doubtless I would have many opportunities to lose time had I published the foundations of my physics. For although they are nearly all so evident that it is necessary only to understand them in order to believe them, and although there has not been a single one for which I did not believe I could give demonstrations, nevertheless, because it is impossible for them to be in agreement with all the diverse opinions of other men, I foresee that I would often be distracted by the disputes they would engender. One could say that these disputes might be useful, as much in order that I may be made aware of my faults, as in order that, if I had anything worthwhile to say, others would by this means have greater understanding of it, and that, since many can see more than one man alone, these others, by beginning right now to use it, might also help me with their discoveries. But, although I recognize that I am extremely prone to error, and that I almost never rely on the first thoughts that come to me, still, the experience I have of the objections that can be made against me prevents me from expecting any profit from them. For I have already often put to the test the judgments of those I took to be my friends, as well as some others whom I took to be indifferent, and even of those too whose maliciousness and envy I knew would try hard enough to discover what affection would hide from my friends. But it has rarely happened that an objection has been raised against me that I had not at all foreseen, unless it was very far removed from my actual subject. Thus I have almost never found any critic of my opinions who did not seem to me to be either less rigorous or less unbiased than myself. Nor have I ever observed that, through the method of disputations practiced in the schools, any truth has been discovered that had until then been unknown. For, so long as each person in the dispute aims at winning, he is more concerned with making much out of the probability than with weighing the arguments on each side, and those who have long been good advocates are not on that account afterwards better judges. As to the utility that others might gain from the communication of my thoughts, it could not be so very great, given that I have not yet at all taken them so far that there is no need to add many things to them before applying them to actual practice. And I think I can say without sounding vain that, if there is anyone who is capable in doing this, it must be myself rather than someone else. Not that there could not be in the world many minds incomparably greater than mine, but because one cannot conceive a thing so well and make it one's own when one learns it from someone else, as one can when one discovers it for oneself. This is so true in this matter that, although I have often explained some of my opinions to people with good minds, who, while I spoke to them, seemed to understand them quite distinctly, nevertheless, when they repeated them, I noticed that they had almost always changed them in such a way that I could no longer acknowledge them as mine. In this connection, I am very happy here to ask our descendants never to believe the things people tell them came from me unless I myself have divulged them. And I am in no way surprised by the extravagances attributed to all those ancient philosophers whose writings we do not have, nor do I judge, for that reason, that their thoughts have been so very unreasonable, given that they were the greatest minds of their time, but only that their thoughts have been poorly reported to us. For one also sees that it has almost never happened that any of their followers who ever surpassed them, and I am sure that the most impassioned of all those who now follow Aristotle would believe themselves fortunate, if they had as much knowledge of nature as Aristotle had, even if it were on the condition that they would never have any more. They are like ivy, which never stretches any higher than the trees supporting it, and which often even descends again after it has reached their tops. For it seems to me that they too are redescending, that is, they are making themselves somehow less knowledgeable than if they had abstained from studying. Not contented with knowing all that is intelligibly explained in their author, they want in addition to find the solutions there are to many difficulties about which he has said nothing, and about which he has perhaps never thought. Still, their manner of philosophizing is very convenient for those who have only very mediocre minds, for the obscurity of the distinctions and the principles which they make use of is the reason why they can speak about all things as boldly as if they knew them, and why they can uphold everything they say against the most subtle and the most adroit, without anyone's having the means of convincing them that they are mistaken. In this they seem to me like a blind man who, in order to fight without disadvantage against someone who is sighted, has made his opponent go into the depths of some very dark cellar. And I may say that these people have an interest in my refraining from publishing the principles of the philosophy I use, for my principles being as very simple and very evident as they are, I would, by publishing them, be doing almost the same as if I were to open some windows and make daylight enter that cellar which they had gone into in order to fight. But even the best minds have no reason for wanting to know these principles. For if they want to know how to speak about all the things and to acquire the reputation for being learned, they will achieve their objective most easily by contenting themselves with probability, which can be found with great difficulty in all sorts of matters, than by seeking the truth. Which can be found without great difficulty in all sorts of matters, than by actually seeking the truth, which can only be discovered little by little in some, and which, when it is a question of speaking about other matters, obliges one to confess frankly that one is ignorant about them. But if they prefer the knowledge of some few truths to the vanity of appearing to be ignorant of nothing, as no doubt it is really preferable to do, and if they want to follow a plan similar to mine, they do not, on that score, need me to say anything more except what I have already said in this discourse. For if they are capable of advancing further than I have, then a fortiori language, they are also capable of finding for themselves all that I think I have found. Insomuch as I have never examined anything except in an orderly manner, it is certain that what still remains for me to discover is of itself more difficult and more hidden than what I have heretofore been able to discover, and they would take much less pleasure in learning it from me than from themselves. Moreover, the habit they will acquire of seeking first the easy things, and then of passing little by degrees to other more difficult ones, will serve them better than all my instructions could do. As for myself, I am convinced that, if I had been taught from my youth all the truths for which I have since then sought demonstrations, and if I had not any difficulty in learning them, I might perhaps have never known any other truths, and at least I would never have acquired the habit and the facility I think I have for always finding new truths, to the extent that I apply myself in searching for them. And, in a word, if there is any task in the world that cannot be accomplished so well by anyone else but the same person who began it, it is the one on which I am working. It is true that, with respect to experiments that can help here, one man alone cannot suffice to perform them all, but neither can he usefully employ hands other than his own, except those of craftsmen, or such people as he could pay in whom the hope of gain, which is a very effective means, would cause to do precisely what he ordered them to do. For as to volunteers who, out of a curiosity or a desire to learn, might offer themselves in order to perhaps to help him, aside from the fact that they usually make more promises than they can produce achievements, and merely make fine proposals, none of which will come to anything, they would inevitably want to be paid by the explanation of various difficulties, or at the least by compliments and useless conversations, which could not cost him so little time as he would not lose by it. And as to the experiments that others have already performed, even if these people did want to communicate them to him, something those who call them secrets would never do, they are for the most part composed of so many details and superfluous ingredients that it would be very hard for him to discern the truth in them. Besides, he would find almost all of them to be so badly explained or even so false, because those who have done them strove to make them appear to be in conformity with their principles, that if there were among them some experiments that might serve him, they could not be worth the time he would need to spend in actually selecting them. In this way, if there were someone in the world whom one assuredly knows to be capable of finding the greatest things and the things as beneficial to the public as possible, and whom, for this cause, other men were to exert themselves to help in every way to succeed his plans, I do not see that they could do a thing for him except to make a donation toward the expenses of the experiments he would need, and, for the rest, to prevent his leisure from being wasted by the impunity of anyone. But, although I do not presume so much of myself as to want to promise anything out of the ordinary, or feast on such vain thoughts as to imagine that the public ought to be especially interested in my plans, I do not have so base a soul that I would not want to accept from anyone any favor that one might believe I had not deserved. All these considerations taken together were the reason why, 3 years ago, I did not at all want to divulge the treatise I had on hand, and why I had even made a resolution not to make public during my lifetime any other treatise which was so general or on the basis of which one could understand the foundations of my physics. But since then, there have been yet again 2 other reasons that have obliged me to place here certain particular essays, and to render to the public some account of my actions and my plans. The first is that, if I failed to do so, many who knew of the intention I once had to have certain writings published could imagine that the reasons for which I am abstaining from doing so were more to my disadvantage than they are. For although I do not love glory excessively, indeed, if I dare say so, I hate it, insomuch as I judge it to be contrary to the tranquillity I esteem above all things, still, I have also never tried to hide my actions as if they were crimes, nor have I taken many precautions so as not to be known. This is the case as much because I would have believed I would be doing myself an injustice, as because it would have given me a certain kind of disquiet, which again would have been contrary to the perfect peace of mind I am seeking. And because, having always been thus indifferent about the concern over being known and not known, I could not prevent myself from acquiring some type of reputation, I thought I ought to do my best to at least spare myself from having a bad one. The other reason that has obliged me to write this is as follows. I saw more and more every day the delay that the plan I have of self-instruction is suffering, because of an infinity of experiments of which I have need and which it is impossible for me to perform without the help of others. And although I do not flatter myself so much as to hope that the public will become greatly taken with my interests, still, I also do not want to fail myself so much as to give those who will survive me cause to reproach me one day on the grounds that I could have left them many far better things than I had done, if I had not so badly neglected making them understand how they could contribute to my plans. And I thought that it was easy to choose certain matters that, without being subjected to much controversy or obliging me to declare more of my principles than I desire, would nevertheless allow me to show quite clearly what I can or cannot do in the sciences. I cannot say whether I have been successful in this, and I do not at all want to prejudice the judgments of anyone in speaking for myself about my writings, but I shall be very happy if they are examined, and, in order to have more of an opportunity to do this, I am imploring all who have any objections to make against them to take the trouble to send them to my publisher, and, on being advised about them by him, I shall try at the same time to append my reply to the objections, and by this, seeing both of them together, readers will judge the truth all more easily. For I promise never to make long replies to them, but only to admit my errors very candidly, if I recognize them, or even if I cannot perceive any, to say simply what I believe to be required for the defense of what I have written, without adding to it an explanation of any new material, in order not to become endlessly involved in one issue after another. And if any of those things about which I have spoken at the beginning of the dioptrics and the meteors are shocking at first glance because I call them suppositions and seem to lack the inclination to prove them, I entreat the reader to have the patience to read the whole thing with attention, and I hope he will find himself satisfied with it. For it seems to me that the reasonings follow each other there in such a way that, just as the last are demonstrated by the means of the first, which are their causes, so these first are reciprocally demonstrated by means of the last, which are their effects. And one must not imagine that I am here committing the fallacy that logicians call a circle, for, experience rendering the majority of these effects very certain, the causes from which I deduce these effects serve not so much to prove them as to explain them. On the contrary, it is rather the case that the causes are what proved by the effects. And I have called them suppositions only to make it understood that I think I can deduce them from these first truths that I have explained above. But I wanted expressly not to do so, in order to prevent certain minds, who imagine that they know in one day all that someone else has thought about them for 20 years as soon as he has said but 2 or 3 words to them about it, and who are the more subject to error and the less capable of truth, the more penetrating and lively they are, from being able to take this occasion to build some extravagant philosophy on what they believe are my principles, and in order to prevent me from being blamed for it. For as to the opinions that are entirely mine, I do not apologize for their being new, since, if one considers well the arguments for them, I am sure that one will find them so simple and so in conformity with the common sense that they will seem less extraordinary and less strange than any others one could have had on the same subjects. Nor do I pride myself at all on being the first discoverer of any of them. Rather, I pride myself on never having accepted them because they have or have not been said by others, but only because reason has persuaded me of them. If craftsmen cannot immediately carry out the invention explained in the dioptrics, I do not believe one could say on that account that it is bad, for, insomuch as skill and practice are needed to make and adjust the machines I have described, without any detail being overlooked there, I would be no less astonished if they were to succeed on the first try, than if someone were able to learn in one day to play the lute with distinction, simply because he had been given a good score. And if I write in French, the language of my country, rather than in Latin, the language of my teachers, it is because I am hoping that those who use only their natural reason in all its purity will judge my opinions better than those who believe only in old books. And as to those who combine good sense with study, whom alone I wish to have as my judges, they will not at all, I am sure, be so partial to Latin that they refuse to listen to my reasons because I explain them in the vernacular. As to the rest, I do not at all want to speak here in detail about the future progress I hope to make in the sciences, or to invoke myself vis-à-vis the public in any promise that I am not assured of keeping. Rather, I shall say simply that I have resolved to spend the rest of my life on nothing, but trying to acquire some knowledge of nature which is such that one could draw from it rules for medicine that are more reliable than those we have to the present. That my inclination puts me at such a great distance from all other sorts of plans, and chiefly from those that can be chiefly useful to some only by being harmful to others, that if circumstances were to force me to busy myself with them, I do not at all believe I could succeed. About this I am here making a declaration, which I know very well cannot serve to make me eminent in the world, but I also have no desire to be so, and I shall always hold myself obliged more to those by whose favour I enjoy my leisure without hindrance, than to those who might offer me the most honourable positions on earth. End of the discourse on the method for conducting one's reason well and for seeking the truth in the sciences. Congratulations. It is time to go to bed.